Good afternoon and welcome. We're so glad you joined us for today's Help Desk session about American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Funds. My name is Erin Patterson. I am the Director of Education Initiatives at Schoolhouse Connection, and I will be guiding us through our discussion today. And I'm joined by several other Schoolhouse staff, Anna Sophia Treyes, Karen Rice, and Barbara Duffield, who are here on hand to provide their expertise in case you have any questions for us later. I know folks are still joining, so I'll give it another minute or so. And while you get settled, I want to just offer a few reminders about today's webinar. First of all, this will be an hour-long session today, and we ask that if you have any questions at any point throughout our session, that you type them into the Q&A box. That's where we will look to know what to answer. We are recording this session as well, so if you miss anything or if there's something you wanted to share with someone, you can find it on our archived webinars page, usually is up within 24 hours, and we'll also share the slides that we go through as well. A certificate of attendance is available to you if you would like, and we also encourage you to join us over on our Slack community at any point after today's session. That's where you can interact with other liaisons and coordinators from around the country. We try and provide updated information and answers to your questions there as well. Just a little bit about Schoolhouse Connection. If you haven't joined us before, we are a national nonprofit advocacy organization, and our mission is overcoming homelessness through education from prenatal through post-secondary. We go about this work in a number of ways, including policy advocacy at the federal and state levels, a wide range of practical assistance to school districts, state education agencies, early childhood development programs, institutions of higher education, and everyone in between. And we always say the jewel in our crown is our network of young scholars who have experienced homelessness themselves and who we are privileged to support, both with financial scholarship assistance as well as case management support as they navigate their post-secondary journey. We encourage you to check out our website, schoolhouseconnection.org. I always like to call out our Q&A from our inbox section. Chances are if you have a question, someone else has had that exact same question and we've answered it and posted it on our website. So we encourage you to check out our resources there. We want to start off today's session by offering you a reminder about American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Funds and where we find ourselves currently. Back in September of 2023, which feels like forever ago at this point, the U.S. Department of Education offered updated guidance about allowable uses for ARP-HCY funds. And as part of that guidance, they asked states to expedite funding, including by modifying their administrative procedures. We were hearing a lot of challenges from school districts and others that it was actually the state agency who was saying no to things that were actually allowable because of lack of information. And so Ed re-emphasized the need to expedite that funding. The Department of Education also asked states to circulate that guidance widely, including to superintendents, school business officers, and other administrators who might be involved in spending decisions. Schoolhouse Connection has a 2-page overview of that guidance on our website for your reference, in case that's helpful to you and your districts and positions as you're trying to expedite spending of these funds. Since then, Schoolhouse Connection has answered your call to have questions answered, to have more information and more examples, importantly, from the field about how these funds are being used. And so since last September, we have had the pleasure of hosting 12 webinars dedicated specifically to spending ARP-HCY funds. You can see we've covered everything from summer activities to chronic absenteeism to partnering with school business officers, motel, hotel stays, and everything in between, in our effort to offer you the latest, most up-to-date examples from the field. It has been our pleasure to share that information with over 4,300 registrants, and we've also packaged what we've heard from school districts and liaisons across the country. That summary is linked on this slide, and one of my colleagues hopefully will share it in the chat here shortly. It is up on our website so that you can scroll through and see exactly how liaisons have answered the question, how are you using your ARP-HCY funds? And so you'll see in that summary that we've pulled out the most compelling examples and quotes, and we've also linked to those specific sessions by topic that those liaisons have joined us for. So we hope you'll check that out. And most importantly, we hope that that will be useful to you no matter where you are on the spending journey. We want to get a sense of how much you've spent and what's next for you. And so I'm going to launch our first poll here, if you will indulge us. So we want to know, hopefully this is showing up on your screen, do you still have ARP-HCY funds left to spend? I see a couple responses coming in already. I'll give it a minute or so for folks to find the poll and click in your answer. I'm going to give us another couple seconds here to answer the question, do you still have ARP-HCY funds left to spend? Okay. Looks like we're missing a few folks, but that's okay. You can see here that of those on this call, the majority of you said yes, you still do have ARP-HCY funds left to spend. A couple of you importantly noted that you're not sure. And so we encourage you to get in touch with your school business office, your superintendent, whomever is responsible for sharing that budget line item with you, and finding out how much is left, how much is available to you, because you still have from now until September 30th to obligate those funds. And then, as we'll talk about in a minute, you have either until January 2025 or longer to liquidate those funds, depending upon what your state decides to do for extended liquidation. So I'm going to put up our next poll question. And this is our second and last poll question. And we want to know, will extended liquidation be available to you? And your response options are, yes, my state has let us know that ARP-HCY funds will be eligible for extended liquidation. No, my state has informed us that extended liquidation will not be available, or I'm not sure, I have not received any communication yet. So we would like to know, has your state let you know about extended liquidation? And I'll give folks another couple seconds. Okay, I'm going to end this poll and share our results here. You can see it's almost evenly split. 36% of you said affirmatively, yes, my state has let us know that ARP-HCY funds will be eligible for extended liquidation. That's great. 27% of you shared that no, you have heard from your state that ARP-HCY funds will not be eligible for extended liquidation. And then lastly, 36% of you said you're not sure. You haven't heard one way or the other from your state. And we know that things are moving quickly this month and the next couple months on that front. So we're hopeful that more states will let their districts know about extended liquidation one way or the other. Thank you for indulging us in our polls. I do want to acknowledge, I do see folks already sharing questions in the Q&A box. Thank you so much. That's exactly what we wanted to use this time for. And we are about to get into your questions here momentarily. First, though, I want to let you know about a new resource that Schoolhouse Connection has developed. This is our ARP-HCY spending resource. We wanted to package for you some ways to spend your funds quickly and to show you how to maximize those funds. So we've developed some categories throughout, things like identification, transportation, early childhood services, and we've tried to spotlight some really specific ideas that fall into one of three categories. Those categories tell you if something is a low cost item, a medium cost, or a high cost item. Some of you may have a lot of ARP-HCY funds left to spend in a short amount of time, and so you need those big ticket items and ideas. Others might have just a couple hundred or a couple $1,000s left, but we still want to make sure every cent is going to children and youth experiencing homelessness. And so We encourage you to check out this new resource. The link is in the chat. And let us know if you have other things that you've been able to spend your funds on that you would love to see reflected in this resource. And I should mention that this resource is available on our new and improved website, which just launched yesterday. So if you haven't had a chance, please check it out. Go poke around and explore. We've made it even easier for you to find the resources that you need. So with that, I want to get us into our question time today. And like I said, we're encouraging you all to submit any and all questions you might have about spending ARP-HCY funds, knowing that our timeline now is from now until September 30th to obligate all funds, and that's regardless of whether or not you will get extended liquidation. And then if you are in a state where you're able to apply for extended liquidation, you'll have up through March of 2026 to liquidate those funds. If your state is not applying for extended liquidation, then you have to liquidate your funds by January of 2025, as long as everything is obligated by September 30th. And so I want to get into our questions now. The first question is related to this timeline. The question says, can we buy items before the September 30th deadline to give to students for the 24-25 school year? For example, school supplies, backpacks, food cards, bus passes, gas cards. So I'm gonna start us off and then invite my colleagues at Schoolhouse to chime in as well. You should absolutely continue obligating and purchasing items before the September 30th deadline. And you may distribute those items up through whatever your liquidation deadline is in your state. And I want to invite Karen, Anna, Sophia, and Barbara to add any specifics to that.
I would add that we would encourage you to think about and kind of anticipate the needs of your students. So reflecting on, what you saw with your students this year and the needs that they have, trying to anticipate so that you can have those items ready for them to use and utilize during that period of time. So thinking through what you might need and then kind of stockpiling those by that September 30th date for use during that liquidation period.
Thank you so much for that question. We want to leave it open now for other questions that you all may have. We invite you to submit those into the Q&A box, and we are happy to answer them. I'll also share, we would love to have any examples of how you're currently using your ARP-HCY funds. You can put those in the Q&A box or the chat if you're able. We're constantly on the lookout for new and innovative ways to use those ARP-HCY funds and to just know what's made a difference in your school district in terms of being able to use those funds. So I'll leave it open here. And while you're thinking, I'll also emphasize some of the allowable uses that are more flexible that districts might not be used to are things like paying for hotel or motel stays for families and students experiencing homelessness. That's a big item that we've seen districts really take advantage of. We've seen some districts pay for a couple nights at a time. Some districts have been able to work with their business office to get approved for multiple nights, more than 2 or 3, which really makes a difference to help students experiencing homelessness be able to show up at school every day ready to learn. So that's an exciting, more flexible use of these funds that your district can take advantage of. We're also seeing some more innovative ways to use the funds for early childhood activities, post-secondary transition activities. And so if you're looking for things to spend funds on, we have a number of resources on our website. We put out a whole series called Flexing the Flexibility of ARP-HCY that's chock full of district examples. I encourage you to check that out. Had a question come in. Can you share why states must apply for the extended liquidation date instead of granting access to all districts? I can try and tell you what the process is to our knowledge, and then my colleagues can jump in and try and explain why. This is the process that Ed has laid out. If a district and state want to take advantage of that extended liquidation, they have to submit a justification, a reason why it would be beneficial to take advantage of extended liquidation. And then usually districts send that to their state, and the state sends all of those applications to the U.S. Department of Education. But would love for my colleagues to chime in with a little more nuance to that process.
I'll just say that we wish that it were a blanket process, but because they're tracking amounts and because they're tracking reasons, they have an application process. As we did try to advocate, we did not try. We did advocate strongly with Congress to just change the deadline to give another year for obligating the funds, and that did not happen in part because of the brinkmanship around the government funding shutdown. So it's a very good question. And what we can say is that the U.S. Department of Education has emphasized to states that it will work with them and that it will help them through this process, and that it will likely be simpler than other processes they may have gone for. So we are very much encouraging, they're encouraging states, and we are also encouraging states to apply for this.
And if I can just jump in here, I will just say that, I mean, as you all know, this is a very new and evolving process. And so I think if you are a district who is thinking this might benefit you, definitely to double check with your state coordinator and determine if that's something that's going to be available, might be helpful as well.
We have another question here. Can you redefine the liquidation date in reference to NOGA end dates, Notice of Grant Award end dates? Thank you, Karen, for clarifying that acronym for me. So the U.S. Department of Education has set out a liquidation deadline of January 2025. We are aware that some states have set liquidation dates that are sooner than January of 2025. I think the most recent one I've heard is October 30th of this year. Some states set December of this year. So it varies by the state. The obligation deadline may not be moved. The obligation deadline of September 30th, 2024 is set by the federal government, and states may not change that. States, however, are adjusting the liquidation deadline. We are encouraging states to follow the federal guidelines for this, which give states and districts until January of 2025. But we encourage you to check with your state agency for whatever liquidation date they have told you in your business offices. I'm going to leave it open here for additional questions that are on your mind, either about allowable uses or about the timing of everything. And would also love to know, a number of you said that, yes, your state has said for sure they are applying for extended liquidation. And so would love to know which state you're in or how they've been communicating that, and if your district is able to take advantage of that. And I'll leave our line open here for a little bit longer. And I'll just add that this is meant to be your time. And so encourage you to take advantage of having us here to answer any questions you might have. This is how we'd like to spend the bulk of our time this afternoon. So please do feel free to ask any and all questions that you may have. We've heard it all at this point, so there's nothing that will surprise us. And we would rather you ask it than not. And while you are thinking of those questions, I'm going to give you a little preview of this resource that we mentioned. Let me try and get my screen right here. So this link takes you to our website, and there's a resource here, our new one called Maximize Federal ARP-HCY Funds, Quick Spending and Cost Guide. And when you go to download it, it's going to look like this. Give my computer just a second. And you'll see how we've outlined in different categories the low, medium, and high cost ideas. So for transportation, for example, buying a vehicle would likely be a higher cost, no matter your district size or allocation. Whereas providing gas cards or bicycles or public transit passes, those would probably be lower cost items, but all of these things are allowable. And so we tried to organize it for you, again, like I said, based upon how much you have left to spend, so that you can sort of hone in on knowing like, okay, I only have a little bit left and I know that transportation is a need. So I'm going to go to this low cost transportation column and see what I can get here to use in my district. So we hope this is something you'll be able to take advantage of, and encourage you to, like I said, share any feedback that you have with us about this resource. Let me go back into our question box here. The question that says, if you were hired on a contract for 100% ARP only, can your contract be continued with the liquidation? If so, how does that process work? Do we need state coordinator permission? So I'm going to tell you my understanding, and again, invite my colleagues to clarify anything. My understanding is that extended liquidation does not apply to staffing. And so encourage you to check with your supervisor, your administrator to determine where your staffing contract falls. But we have been told that extended liquidation will not apply to staffing for the purposes of ARP-HCY.
I would add to that, if you are contracted through a community organization, that would be a different situation. And so always recommend checking with your state coordinator, but if that contract with that community-based organization is in place by September 30th, then those services and that contract would be able to continue through the liquidation period.
And I'll just add one more thing, which is, because contracts, extended liquidation does apply to contracts. So if it's capacity through a contract, then it certainly is at least eligible again through a CBO. But also that it's important to check now, because if your state is going to apply, then you might want to amend the contract to extend it prior. So again, everything has to be sort of done and amended before September 30th. So yes, if it was a CBO contracted out, it could apply, but you want to make sure that the contract is amended before September 30th.
The next question says, can you define obligated versus spent? And I'm going to lean on Barbara for this one because I don't want to get the legalese messed up here.
Obligated is committed. So you sign a contract. Spent is you actually spend the contract down. So obligating is the committing of the funds, and spending is the spending and liquidating are the same thing. So that means they're actually sort of spent down. That's the layperson's explanation. So again, for example, you could buy store cards. When you're buying them, you're committing. In this case, your store cards are a little bit different than, say, shoes, but you obligate them and then they get liquidated when they actually get dispersed and spent down.
And so with regards to obligation and liquidation deadlines, then you do have until September 30th to obligate any items. If you are in a district and state that will not apply for extended liquidation, that means you only have from September 30th until the end of January 2025 to liquidate and spend that money and those purchases. So just keep that in mind if you are drawing up any new contracts and don't have extended liquidation. That's a shorter time frame. We had a specific question come in about clothing. The question says, purchasing clothing for the student is cumbersome as a bulk order is challenging to make. Can a set amount of funds be added to a card per student excuse me, be offered as an entitlement for their use to purchase the clothing. So I'm going to, excuse me, look to our brain trust for this one.
Store cards are absolutely an allowable use of funds. And so if clothing is a need for your students or your families, we would absolutely say figure out the best way to do that, whatever works best. And so if that bulk order is hard, you could certainly work with different stores in your community to purchase store cards for students to be able to go and purchase the items that they need, whether that's winter gear or socks or hygiene supplies, whatever that student needs at that store. I will say that we have heard of a number of LEAs that are using they're called charitable store cards from certain companies and certain retailers that will offer those. And so those are ways for students and families to access what they need. Again, whether it's the clothing or the shoes or hygiene supplies or whatever that looks like. So store cards are a really great way to do that. So definitely talk with your business office staff on the best way to purchase those, whether that's through a P card or a purchase order with the store that you want to work with.
I love the idea actually of an allowance per student per card as a way to deal with that. So Estelle, I think that's brilliant. Love it.
Thank you very much. Another clarification regarding liquidation. Does liquidation mean that is the last day to hand out any and all items purchased with ARP-HCY funds? So if your liquidation day, for example, is January 31st of 2025, anything that was obligated by September 30th of 2024 must be liquidated, spent, handed out, used by then. There are maybe a few exceptions that I would love for my colleagues to chime in on, because we've gotten some questions from districts about specific items and have tried to seek clarification from Ed on a few things. So I'll leave it open for others to chime in.
Just to say that we're expecting more clarification from the U.S. Department of Education on that exact question. I think they may look at store cards and gas cards differently, for example, from supplies like shoes and backpacks and coats and those sorts of things. So we have a question into them that we hope will be responded to soon, and expect there to be a couple webinars over the next couple months that will make that clear. One thing that also isn't clear that we've also raised for them is, for example, if you were to distribute items to a community partner, what happens then? Could that partner then distribute them later? Because you as the LEA have distributed them to a community partner. So those are things that we're hoping to get clarification on in the next couple weeks/months.
Another question asks, what can funds be used for? Do funds work for trauma-informed care, mental health, and emotional and social support? So the first part of your question first, ARP-HCY funds can be used for any of the allowable 16 uses that EHCY or Education of Homeless Children and Youth funds can be used for, plus some additional more flexible uses, things like hotel motel stays, for example, that we spoke to earlier. And absolutely, they can absolutely be used to provide mental health support, trauma-informed services to students experiencing homelessness, particularly if you are contracted with a community partner to provide those items. And we've seen some examples from around the country of how districts are doing just that. And I'll leave it open for others to chime in.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that we have seen LEAs use it for a lot of different things. Some of that could just be literally professional development. I know it's summer months, and so it might be helpful to start thinking about providing any kind of professional development on trauma-informed care, just preparing for the beginning of the school year. We've also seen districts just hire different folks or enter contracts. Or I think right now it's later, so probably entering a contract would be the best way of doing that. But again, just to provide targeted supports sometimes to immigrant students or other folks who may need just that extra care. So yes, allowable.
I'll add one example that I was just reminded of. One school district prepaid their contract with a community-based mental health provider to work with their students experiencing homelessness. And so that is something to think about, even with this short time frame. Something is better than nothing for our students. And so if you are able to obligate and prepay that contract with a community partner by September 30th, then you could at least have a couple months of services for your students experiencing homelessness, ideally more if you are able to take advantage of extended liquidation. The next question asks, can these funds be used for extracurricular activities and outside of school activities? Absolutely, you can use funds, especially if they are being used to remove barriers to participation for students experiencing homelessness in those extracurricular activities. And as we've mentioned several times, contracting with your community-based providers is a really great way to do that, to ensure that they are partnering with you to meet those needs. And we have a couple different examples, both in our Flexing the Flexibility series and on our website in general, of how school districts have partnered with their after school and out of school time providers with these funds to be able to help increase access to those services for students experiencing homelessness. Another question came in asking, this person says, my district said prepaid store cards, bus passes, et cetera, are considered assets and must be in students' hands by September 30th. It has been a long and fraught conversation, and I'm not sure how much further to take it, since a longer distribution time would be more helpful. Is it something that is district decided? First, I want to acknowledge your efforts in attempting to get a longer timeline and time frame for those prepaid cards and bus passes. I think the short answer is yes, it is district decided, but we do have, like we mentioned, that guidance from the U.S. Department of Education clarifying and specifying that those items, as long as they're obligated by September 30th, may be liquidated, used, and drawn down through January of 2025. And so if that is helpful to you, we'd be happy to take this conversation offline and see if we can help you craft anything else to your district to convince them. We're aware that it's often a business officer who's not really familiar with the nuances of McKinney-Vento who's making that decision. And so we are very sympathetic to that and your efforts.
And what would help us, I think, help you with the advocacy is if we knew, because there's definitely some cases where districts have said, we don't care what the feds say, we're just going to do this. And then we've had cases where it just needed to be stated clear. Somebody needed to see it on, from a U.S. Department of Education official, and they just needed it clear. So for example, in this case, if we had it in as clear as possible from the U.S. Department of Education saying, you can distribute these through January 30th. I mean, they've said liquidated and obligated, but if they made it like crystal clear in those sorts of in those words, would that then be helpful in your fraught conversations? Would that help? I think that the more we know that sort of information, like what would actually help us, that what does Ed need to say to help us help you, that would be great.
And I see someone else commented, is that on the website with the guide? We do have the U.S. Department of Education September 2023 Dear Colleague letter, which outlines some of this. And so we can drop a link to that in the chat. You can also just go to our website and find the ARP-HCY dropdown, and everything that we've mentioned is on that page. Sorry, I skipped this question earlier. So apologies for not seeing it. The question asked, with school districts normally working with bids to ensure vendors, how do you go around the bid system? I'm not laughing at you. We are laughing so that we don't cry. I'm going to leave it open for my colleagues.
One strategy you may want to consider is what that threshold is for the bid process. And so in certain LEAs, it's different amounts, but trying to keep your amounts underneath that threshold might make it easier to kind of circumnavigate to that process. And so that might mean using different vendors and keeping different vendors under the threshold. So you have multiple vendors, but still below that amount, so you don't have to go through the bidding process.
Would love to hear any more questions that you have. Feel like we're just getting warmed up. And the team here at Schoolhouse has been dropping a lot of links into the chat. So we encourage you to check those out. The Dear Colleague letter is there, a 2-pager with allowable uses as a quick reference, quick guide to spending, a lot of other resources here, as well as the link to our ARP-HCY website. So we hope that those will be useful. I'll leave it open for another couple seconds if others have additional questions that you thought of or anything else you'd like to ask while we're here about ARP-HCY.
And I'll just add, this is sort of our wrap up for the school year ARP-HCY sessions. Erin shared we've done a lot between now and September, last September. But if you think of resources or tools or things that would be helpful, let us know over the next 3 or 4 months.
We saw the message in the chat. We're gonna resend some of those links to make sure everyone gets them before we log off here. All right, you all. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for your great questions. We cannot thank you enough for everything you're doing in your districts and states to support students experiencing homelessness. We are always here if you want to reach out and have any more questions that you think of later. We would be glad to answer those. Had another quick question come in here. We deposit, sorry, someone just adding to the conversation. We deposit funds with a gas card provider and draw down weekly. That's another good strategy. I see a raised hand and I don't have the ability to unmute folks, but we encourage you to type anything into that Q&A box if you have a question or a comment for us. So my apologies for that, but I wanted to acknowledge the raised hand there if there was something you wanted to flag for us. Please do reach out, get in touch with us. You can email us directly. You can submit a question into our question form on our website, but you will regardless be talking to a real live human being, and we are here to help and help you get those funds obligated by September 30th and spent in the best way possible. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon, and we'll see you on a webinar soon. Thanks, everyone.